welcome to the final live show from the Politics Hour International for this academic year. In this episode, we'll be discussing the new wave of COVID that's been exhausting India's resources, plastic pollution in the ocean in light of Earth Day, as well as the unconventional Oscar ceremony that we saw this year. But first, a brief roundup of international news this week. Was the university. On the 20th of April, firefighters were finally successful in containing and extinguishing a massive wildfire that had been tearing through South Africa's Table Mountain for 3 days. Amongst the masses of damage done to property and nature was the University of Cape Town's library, which contained many rare and valuable books that were unfortunately destroyed. Other historical buildings, including a 225-year-old windmill, were also lost to the fire. A 35-year-old man has been arrested in connection to starting it, and a case for arson has been opened. Over in the US, President Biden addressed 40 other world leaders in a virtual climate summit in a bid to increase commitments to reducing global emissions. As well as this, the Singapore International Energy Week 2021 launch brings global leaders together in an attempt to advance the transition into green energy. In Asia especially, there is an increasing demand for energy that is occurring alongside the ever-growing threat of climate change and global emissions. So international collaboration has been called in to support states and businesses alike in the transition. Here's a small excerpt of what that launch entailed.
Today is a special day, not just for SEAL, but it marks the resumption of MICE events in Singapore. Thank you very much for being part of this hybrid event. Different format, but same spirit. While Singapore is known as the little red dot, we also aspire to be a bright green spark.
Climate change is one of the greatest challenges we will face for generations to come, and one that has sparked a strong interest in the use of LNG as the cleanest fossil fuel for energy production.
We need to achieve reliability, affordability, and sustainability in our energy story to meet Singapore's future social and economic needs.
Elsewhere in Asia, India has become the new COVID capital of the world, seeing more cases in the last 7 days than any other country. A massive second wave has had the official death toll surpass 200,000. Experts believe the number may be higher. People have died waiting for beds as oxygen supplies run low and hospitals crumble under the strain. Fuad reports further.
Hello. Apologies for that. Yes, as Saf mentioned there, India, it has been strangled with a vicious wave of coronavirus infections, with hospitals being overwhelmed and on the brink of collapse. Oxygen is in critically low supply and crematoriums operating non-stop. In total, India has reported 739,257 new infections on Thursday, the world's highest single-day total. The overall death toll officially passed 200,000 on Wednesday, though experts believe the actual number could be much higher. Wednesday also saw the deadliest day so far, with 3,645 people succumbing to the coronavirus. As the virus is reaching more rural towns where there is a lack of sufficient resources, there are worries that the worst is yet to come. The Modi government has come under heavy criticism, with many questioning the lack of preparation and strategy in dealing with this new wave of infections. Local elections have been permitted to continue, vaccines have not been delivered to the population, and prevention measures have been largely ignored. Here's what a journalist in India makes of the government's efforts.
After all, the most appalling thing is that the government's top leaders, top leadership, they never exhibited anything scientific. For example, While the Prime Minister was attending political rallies in Bengal, he was not wearing mask. And he was publicly expressing his gratitude and happiness over seeing millions of people gathering to watch his public rallies. And he, even at a point of time, he tweeted that take the Kumbh Mela as a kind of symbolic fight against COVID. How can a prime minister permit to take place such kind of a function?
Yes, and here's a Bangalore coffee shop owner on what the situation is like over there.
North Indian state, they don't have any facility. People are just dying every minute without oxygen, without treatment. And especially in Bangalore, it's like a multi city, and it has been completely empty on the street. Nobody on the street. Shops are closed. Even restaurants, pubs, and bars, and everything is closed. Only construction work is happening in the city. In Bangalore alone, it's become like a 30,000 cases, 39,000 cases per day. So the situation is very worse in India, and the problem, like as we know that it's have been happen all over India. The second wave, the most of the countries especially in the European countries and the Middle Eastern countries, they have prepared for that. They have got enough hospitals and the oxygen and the beds and everything. But unfortunately, the situation in India, which they haven't care about it, God knows what gonna happen. They have been preparing the vaccination, but it's not enough. It's highly cost. People cannot afford India. Like 2/3 of poor people are living in India, and the government is they're charging like 600 rupees like for the private hospital, and 300 rupees for the government, and it's not enough production even. And India, they don't have even like oxygen. As a Bangalore resident, and it's my life, it's the first time seeing the cities like that, and God knows when it's gonna get over, and we just ask to pray for everybody.
The journalist residing in India.
The government had no scientific vision, no preparedness, no empathy to its countrymen. Instead of saving its vaccine, its facilities, its oxygen units in the country for its men, they were only trying to make money out of it. And I think that is the government created tragedy. That is what is now unearthing in India.
Well, joining me live to discuss this extremely tragic situation that we've seen unfolding in India is Ankita, a correspondent with Deutsche Welle in New Delhi. She primarily covers Indian politics and gender issues. In 2020, she received a grant from the National Geographic Society to cover a story on India's migrant crisis. She has a master's degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Hi, Ankita. Ankita, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Fuad. I hope you're well.
Yes, and you. Just first of all, really, could you please give us an idea of what the situation is like on the ground at the moment for yourself?
Yeah. This is a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, if I may say. This is a crisis independent India has never experienced. It's a problem that could have been handled well. We didn't need to reach here, to be honest. Right now, it's such a situation that there's a new mutant virus going around. The new mutant is extremely dangerous. It's a lot of people under 40 are severely affected by this new mutant. And what has happened is that the government was under the impression that we had a very good recovery rate in the last wave of the pandemic, and that's what the government relied on instead of actually investing in our healthcare infrastructure, in our healthcare system. They thought that people would eventually recover and there would sort of be a moment of herd immunity. But that's something that hasn't happened. A lot of people are dying from basic need. Someone's oxygen is going down, they're not getting a cylinder. They are not getting basic medicines. There's a medicine going around called FabiFlu, which you take in the initial days of your infection. There's a lot of misinformation going around on what kind of medicine should be taken. So there's a lot of hoarding happening. Black market rates are being charged for oxygen, remdesivir. So this is what is happening. It's a situation where people are literally choking, like people in the country are literally choking, and what the government is doing is just simply turning a blind eye.
And just sort of on the black market and the lack of oxygen supply that you mentioned there, could you tell us a bit more about that and how it's kind of unfolded?
So India has always had an issue with oxygen supply. It's actually always had an issue with capacity versus need in its healthcare system. This has now come out in the open. In the initial days of the pandemic, after the first wave two, India exported its oxygen to other countries. India exported its vaccines. There was this diplomacy going on. Now, what has happened is that we don't have any oxygen plants. We are not setting up oxygen plants, whereas the tender for an oxygen plant can be floated within 2 weeks. So why is the government not doing that? There is internal politics going on between the states. So the states which are not controlled by India's ruling party, which is like Maharashtra and Delhi, they are being blamed by the central government for not handling the pandemic well, and there have been attempts to showcase to the public that the non-BJP controlled states are handling the pandemic badly. But now the problem is out in the open, because even in the BJP controlled states, the hospitals are running out of oxygen, and people have been pleading all over social media. But the issue is that this BJP government is unable to take criticism. Recently, someone was booked by the cops in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is controlled by the BJP, just because that person asked for oxygen online. So that's the situation right now.
Wow. And in terms of, the current wave we're seeing, what are the kind of causes of it? Why are we seeing such a vicious wave?
I would say there are multiple factors. One is obviously the new mutant. The second is the fact that people were allowed to congregate. Life went on normally as if nothing happened. There were religious congregations, as the first journalist mentioned. There was a gathering of like millions of people. There was people started going to each other's homes. People started holding weddings. It's like the pandemic never existed. In the month of January and February, you had people saying, "Oh, there is no coronavirus in India. Coronavirus has left India." That was the kind of stuff floating around. Then another problem was that there was misinformation on WhatsApp. Most Indians use WhatsApp, and on WhatsApp, information was going around that if you take like homemade remedies, you will not get the virus. So it's basically coupled, like all these factors coupled in to form this disaster. It was a disaster waiting to happen. The new mutant was discovered in October. Experts had been warning about a wave for months, and the government did not send this information out to the people. They did not warn the people. There are reports now that the government of Uttar Pradesh, which is India's biggest state, was aware that the coronavirus is now airborne. It did not inform even the members of the UP Medical Board. That's how severe the pandemic is, and that's how severely the government is not taking it.
And are you seeing sort of growing anger from the Indian people towards the government?
I would say a certain section, yes, a certain privileged section which has access to internet and social media. There's also a section of the populace that has been reaching out to volunteers because politicians have been unable to help them. So there is this anger. But the fear is that we have an election 3 years down the line, and public memory is really short in India. So there is a high possibility that the people will forget what happened. They will move on, and they will not hold this government accountable. What we need at this hour is the need of a systemic change. People need to call for that. But right now, because of this humanitarian crisis, people are unable to realize that, and the government is simply just making use of it.
And, we've seen elections being permitted to carry out in West Bengal, for example, which is supposedly the next epicenter of infections. Why have these elections been allowed to continue?
I was actually in West Bengal myself in March. I was covering elections. If I give you an example, there were people in areas of West Bengal where they were without masks. They were walking around without masks. They were speaking to journalists without masks. And the rallies, and I would not say just the BJP, or most political parties held, or actually all political parties held their election rallies. So obviously it's a claim of in West Bengal, it's a very different situation altogether. It was a fight of, West Bengal is typically a left-leaning state. It has not had the BJP ever in power. So it was sort of like BJP was gaining momentum in the state because there was a lot of anger with the state government. So the elections were allowed to be held for political reasons. Now the issue is that when the rally started to be held and cases started to spread and most of the country was in a problem, why was the Prime Minister in the state of West Bengal holding rallies without wearing a mask? That is a question that people have not asked. And the issue is that if the Prime Minister of the country, yesterday, Narendra Modi encouraged Indians to go vote in the West Bengal elections following COVID protocols to celebrate the festival of democracy. Why would you ask people to celebrate the festival of democracy when you have so many millions of people choking to death every single day?
And in terms of the response, in terms of the vaccine programs, how has that been faring out? And is there still that anger that people not enough people have been vaccinated in India?
Yeah, of course. I think what the government strategy is that they started vaccinating the people who were older, because above senior citizens, and people above 45, because they were under the impression that the virus will, if it spreads, it will mostly, kill people who are older with comorbidities. What they did not realize that this virus, even doctors don't know who it affects and how it affects, right? So when the government started allowing all these rallies and with vaccines, and the problem that was happening was that they were exporting vaccines. There was this vaccine diplomacy going on, despite being one of the world's biggest producers of vaccines. We started exporting our vaccines and not vaccinating our population. So now the problem is that the government is obviously looking for an opportunity to profit out of the situation. So now they're showing the public that we don't have the raw materials, we need the raw materials from the US, we need vaccines from other countries. Now what's going to happen is that they have already opened vaccination up for people above the age of 18, but they are now being charged, and they can be charged anything from rupees 300 to rupees 600, which a person who has a well-paying job can afford. But someone who's poor, whose daily income is like less than like $5 a month, what is that person going to do? How will they afford the vaccine? So now it's just simply become a political game. So the question is, why did they export the vaccines when the public health is a central issue, is a government issue? The vaccine should be given to people for free in the first place. Why were they exported, and why is now this politics being played out where people are being told that they have to pay to be vaccinated and to stay safe?
And just finally, what do you see? It's a difficult question, but what do you see being the way out for the current situation India finds itself in?
That's actually a great question. The way out is obviously holding this government accountable. The way out will be, for now, the government is saying that, okay, people should stay at home, they should not venture out. That is not the solution. The solution is that the problem is that people are getting the virus even by sitting at home. So the thing that needs to be done is immediately oxygen supply needs to be increased. Medical oxygen industries need to start producing oxygen. They need to start making ventilators. The public needs to hold the government accountable for millions of and billions of rupees that went into a PM CARES fund last year, which the government raised money to handle the pandemic, to buy ventilators and support the healthcare system, but nobody knows where the money went. And the journalists, when they're filing for the right to they're filing for that information under India's Right to Information Act, they're not getting that information. So data transparency needs to come in. Deaths which are being botched up, which are not being reported, they need to be reported so that people know how bad the situation is in India right now. Right now, this is an attempt to show the world that the situation is not as bad as they would like to believe. And obviously, another thing that the way ahead should be that there should not be a crackdown on people who are actually trying to help. Right now, there are so many volunteers across the country who are trying to help people get cylinders, medicines, and a lot of other things, but they are being threatened with the National Security Act, and it's absurd because they're citizens who are trying to help each other people. So the government should stop these intimidation tactics as soon as possible and let the community come together to help each other. Otherwise, people will die.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Akita, for joining us. Definitely very concerning scenes we're seeing develop there. I wish you all the best and good health.
Thank you. Thank you, Fuad.
Thank you. That was Ankita, correspondent with Deutsche Welle in New Delhi. Yes, as you can hear, the very concerning scenes in India, and we're seeing a lot of public anger boil through this vicious wave of infections, and we'll definitely be keeping a close eye to see how things develop. Back to you, Saffron.
Thanks, Fuad. Now, after another Earth Day passes, we're yet again reminded of our impact on the planet. So what exactly is the level of damage that we're seeing, and what is currently being done to turn back time and save our environment? Dunny reports further.
The ocean's deadliest predator is our plastics. Our seas are in a sorry state, with 8 million metric tons of plastic waste ending up in our oceans each year. That's the equivalent of a truckload of plastic being dumped into the sea every single minute. For our fragile ocean ecosystems, this is quite simply catastrophic. With the help of Dr. Gareth Abrahams, a lecturer of the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of Liverpool, he explains to us why plastic pollution is such a great threat. Hi, Gareth. Thank you so much for being part of the show today. I guess the first thing that pops up into our minds when we talk about plastic pollution is these horrifying images of ocean and land wildlife being found dead or trapped in plastic waste that we find in our houses or part of our everyday use. It is really disturbing to think the very plastics we drink from or eat with end up on the shores of these endangered animals. So I guess the first question I ask you is, what is the cause of our oceans, our landscapes being polluted by plastics, and how can we prevent our oceans from becoming a plastic wasteland?
Basically, the simple answer to the first part is it's plastic, right? We consume an awful lot of plastic, and you don't even know where the plastic is sometimes, right? It's subtle. That's why I do a lot in the construction industry. You don't realise that certain materials like paint, when it goes off and it cures, turns into a kind of plastic, right? So when you're painting your walls, you wash your brushes, all that's going straight down the sink. It's effectively a kind of a plastic going to the thing. But of course, it's obviously, as you say, it's in the bottles you drink from, it's in the crisp packets and your Mars bar packets and so on and so forth. So how can you stop it? Well, the answer is you've got to stop using plastic. That's as simple as it gets, because even if you recycle, you can only recycle so many times. Right, and then so if it's a good quality virgin plastic, I think you've got something like 3 hits at it. So if you think of that, it just delays the process before it ends up in the landfill, and then it breaks down. It goes into the water course. The water gets washed through the soil and ends up in the rivers and in the ocean. So however way you see it, it eventually goes the same way. It just delays the process or not. So shifting away from plastic options is key, really. Yeah.
And I guess we can all agree, we've seen like restaurants, cafes, and supermarkets improve on their plastic use, replacing plastic straws, improving their packaging and putting prices on bags, and just cultivating the idea of these things to be reusable. How much do you think this ban on plastic straws, cutlery, food packaging helps reduce plastic pollution? And do you think the government has done a great job at it so far?
So, I mean, obviously, whatever you do is worth doing, right? So, stopping the plastic straws, that's obviously caught the headlines because we all know what straws look like, and everybody's been using them since they're probably little toddlers and the like. So it's a good image of something to attach to. It's obviously having an effect, right? So you're using less plastic straws, then it's just the tip of the iceberg, really. I mean, if you go back to stick with the shopping side, so your bags may not be plastic anymore, or they're being reused and so forth. But depending on where you shop, maybe your apples are wrapped up in plastic, or cucumbers are wrapped up in plastic. What's all about? Bananas are wrapped up in plastic. Bananas and oranges come with their own wrapping. That's the beauty of a banana, isn't it? It comes with its own wrapping, and yet we wrap them up in plastic. So I think, they're starting and they're making some headway, and that's great. But they're only just starting to touch on that. Yeah. The other thing is about the government. Are the government doing enough? Well, they're starting, and that's a good thing. But they're not. We've got an awful long way to go to get there. To make a real demonstrable effect, impact. And so, I think as long as they keep scaling it up, at a speed, yes, that might be sufficient, but they really have got to ramp it up. In the same way they're doing with carbon, they're talking about carbon zero by 2035. Where's the plastic zero by 2035? Where's that? I don't hear anyone saying we're going to be plastic zero by 2035. Why? We should have that. That makes sense. Where's our strategy for reducing plastic as a whole, not just little interventions? We need a holistic thing. We probably need something to do with informing people as well. I mean, you said that. So you must have the same. Everyone must have the same problem I've got. So obviously, recycling is not the answer, but it helps a little bit, slows it down a little bit, takes some plastic out of the system. But you get a bag. You're not quite sure. Can I recycle this? Can I not recycle it? Can I recycle it in this neighbourhood, or is it the next village I'm allowed to recycle this, or
Yeah.
you've got no idea. So we need clearer guidance, maybe on the packaging, maybe we need some sort of system to help people out so we know what goes where and the like. And then, of course, you might have, this is a friend told me, you might have one plastic with another cellophane topping. Well, the cellophane is not recyclable, at the bottom is. Well, what's all that about? You know, am I going to scratch off all the cellophane? No. So we need a clearer process here. I don't think.
Now, I know you work closely with Changing Streams, a not-for-profit organisation that is in partnership with our University of Liverpool. What is their aim and what do they do to reduce plastic in the environment?
That's a very good question. So, Changing Streams, so I co-founded Change Streams with some industry leaders and one of my colleagues, Jonathan Sharples, Professor Jonathan Sharples. And we came together, we're very different people coming from different worlds. We came together because we all had this shared image of tackling the construction industry, particularly in removing plastic. Why construction? Well, there's several reasons. One of the obvious, selfishly, is I understand construction, right? So I know how it works and so on and so forth. Another reason is that after the packaging retail industry, it's the second biggest producer of plastic in the UK, third biggest in Europe. So it's a massive, big contributor.
Yeah.
The important thing is nobody actually, if we don't know where plastic is in everyday life, in construction it's even worse, right? Half of it's buried. So you've got plastering on your walls. As I said, there could be plastic in the paint, but the plasterboard itself might have plastic on the bottom to connect them together, stop beads, main beads, and so forth. There's plastic in the ground in your pipeworks, and it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's invisible to us. It's invisible to architects. We don't know necessarily where it's coming from or where it's going. We don't know how much is being chopped and stuck in a skip.
Yeah.
You buy 10 meters of gutter, they throw 3 meters away, it goes in a skip, and so on. So Change Stream was set up with the purpose of the long-term aim of eliminating plastic from construction. That's a very big, ambitious scheme. You've got to be ambitious with these things. And our aim is to work out where it all is, work out where the plastic is, work out alternatives. So can we swap a plastic version for a plastic less or a non-plastic alternative? Is that possible? What does it look like? How do we pick it?
Yeah.
How do we encourage people to use it? How do we encourage developers to go for the less plastic version, the non-plasticated guttering, not plastic windows and so on? But it's difficult because everything's set in its ways and so on. So that's what Change Streams is all about, and we're getting a lot of traction with that now. But we're in the Telegraph and the Guardian, that helps, and we've attracted some developers now. So that's good, and we're hoping to really have an impact now where we can say that this scheme, we've got rid of some of the plastic out of this scheme, and we did that by working with the industry and trying to help them. They're not baddies, it's about helping them to find it and work out how to make it stack up, plastic or less plastic.
Yeah, and I guess organisations like that will help, more and more people that are wanting to get involved and contribute to stopping plastic pollution. What advice would you give someone who wants to reduce plastic waste for the first time? How would you advise them to start or what to Google?
So the easiest thing is just it's think about what it's made of. So I always say to people, when people say, like, why do you do this? And why are you focusing? I always think, well, up until recently, I always thought about what something did, right? So I was focused on performance. So I say, when I was an architect, I was thinking about how good is my insulation, how thick are the windows, how live they are. And even in your day-to-day life, you might think, oh, I need a new toothbrush or I need a new whatever. You think about what does it do, how does it perform, why is it better than that toothbrush, will it make my teeth cleaner, or will I've got to brush my hair, will it make my hair, I don't know, straighter or whatever. Shampoo, for example, I seem to be stuck in her area, but you get what I'm saying. Whatever it is that you're doing, there are things that where you're selecting a product based on what it does, but you're very rarely saying to yourself, what is that thing made of? Right? And you might not always know, right? Sometimes plastic, it's hidden, you can't spot it. But no one's expecting you to get rid of it in your life entirely. It's about trying to say, because we've got to work by stage increments. So you can say, I've gone for this. I could have gone. Is there anything else I could pick which is less plasticated? You Google it. You look around. You find bamboo. Often comes up. There's a bamboo version of the same thing. So you might find, I can find that. I'll go for that instead. And these little things you might think are small and inconsequential, but You add those up across your year, year after year. You imagine everyone else doing the same thing. Suddenly, you're building a bit of resilience to this obsession we've got about plastic and sticking in a bottle. It must taste better or whatever. So that's my advice.
Now, to further understand the plastic pollution pandemic, what is going on, why it is happening, and how we can solve it, I speak to two students who share their passion, expertise, and advice on how to solve plastic pollution once and for all.
Hi, my name is Dawood Qureshi and I go to the University of Portsmouth.
Hi, my name's Eloise and I go to the University of Portsmouth.
Hi guys, thank you so much for being part of the show today. I guess what's so unique about this discussion today is that we are all students, and being a student, we barely have any free time on our hands. So I guess I'll ask both of you this question first. Why are you so passionate about plastic pollution, and how do you fit it into your busy schedules?
I think with me, it's a bit weird because it didn't actually start like looking at the sea and looking at plastic in the sea. It started on like terrestrial environments, like on the land. So I used to do a lot of volunteering when I was a kid. I already am a kid. When I was like a bit younger, and I just, on nature reserves and things, and we used to do a lot of clearing up of like environments and areas, and there was so much plastic everywhere. Like everywhere you'd go, in the rivers, in the bushes, on the grass, everywhere, there'd just be plastic everywhere. And it kind of got me thinking, because I thought, obviously the plastic's here because people are littering when they're going to the reserves, but a lot of the plastic looks like it's from really far away, and it doesn't look like it should be from around here anyway in these local areas, because it was in rivers and things. But I really sort of wondered where it had come from. And so obviously did some research and, looked things up a bit. You can Google anything, and found that quite a lot of the plastic that was coming into the rivers of the areas that I was doing volunteering in came from other countries almost. And it'd gone into the ocean, it'd been thrown into the ocean, and obviously been in the ocean for so long because plastic is so durable and it doesn't rot away or anything. And it just, sort of come into these areas, into these reserves, and clogged up all the systems. And so I think that that upset me quite a lot as a younger person. And I sort of did more research into that and realized that this was kind of something that I needed to look more at. But even then, I didn't really know that I wanted to be a marine biologist. I just knew I wanted to conserve, the environment. I wanted to protect these environments. And a big part of that was looking at plastic pollution in terrestrial environments, and the fact that it does actually source from plastic pollution in the ocean. And then obviously later on, sort of discovering that I wanted to study like whales and dolphins, and to study marine mammals, looking at the plastic that was destroying like the ecosystems and the animals that I love. I realized, this is a very big part of what I want to do is, conserving these environments. And by conserving these environments, I have to look at plastic pollution, whether I like it or not.
Eloise, the same with you. Why are you so passionate about this?
Yeah, so I think for me, my sort of introduction to it was through sort of just watching sort of sciencey videos when I was younger, and that was always the thing that I was sort of really interested in. And I think I saw this one video, and it said about don't know if you know a bit of a weird one, but the Greek myth of Midas' touch, where it's everything that he touches in this king turns to gold, and he thinks, oh, it's fantastic, but then his entire world just becomes gold. And they sort of said about that, how that's literally the same thing that's happening with plastic. We've created this fantastic product that helps everyone, and has in a lot of ways improved people's lives, but at the same time it's really is destroying sort of the environment around it. And then I think for me, the more sort of I looked into it, and the more sort of research I did around the topic, and you sort of realize just how harmful it actually is to the environment, and how sort of the long-reaching impacts of it can be really devastating.
There's these startling images, you see plastered all over social media, animals caught trapped in plastic, found dead because of the plastic. They're eating it, it's destroying their habitats. How do these images make you guys feel? Does it affect you in any way? And also, do you think everybody else that sees these images, do you think it's impacting them to also reduce their plastic intake?
Yeah, I think in terms of shock factor, it is very important to see these images a lot of the time, because when I see them, obviously they make me quite upset and they make me want to do something. There is, I think, every single time there is a fear factor that is put into any sort of activist movement or any sort of environmental movement, there may be a slight problem in that it causes people to lose hope. there's so much of it going around that you sort of think, oh, what can we do about this? And it completely depresses you and makes you think that there's nothing left in the world, you know, and you can't do anything, especially with, I don't know, there's a recent documentary called Seaspiracy, you know, that's been watched quite a lot by people. And I think it's important. And I think the shock factor is important because it makes people sit up and want to do something about it and want to do things. You know, that's the point of documentaries and stories, and it makes you do things and it inspires you. But on the flip side, it does have a problem in that it does make people fear almost everything, and then they almost lose hope. So I think there's good and bad to it, and I think it does need to be balanced out by good pictures of what's happening in the world that is actually benefiting us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think it is an interesting sort of idea about trying to visualize it as a problem, because I think, you know, it is so hard, especially with the fact that like most of the sort of pollution is sort of microplastic, so you know people can't see it at all because it's not visible to the naked eye. So it's sort of, you know, it is quite startling sort of seeing these images that, you know, people think, oh well, micro must not be that big, and you know, you don't really tend to think about like, oh, what's my plastic bag sort of done to the sea, and you know, but then when you sort of like see, like, I think there's like quite a, I don't know, sort of like not a famous image, but sort of, you know, it's quite widely circulated. It's like one of a seagull with its entire like stomach contents just full of plastic, and you sort of, and you do see images like that, and it is, you know, it's hard not to feel anything about it, you know, and it's hard not to be scared by it. But I think, you know, definitely with what Dara was saying, that, you know, it's a fine line between sort of being absolutely terrifying and, you know, thinking, oh my god, there's nothing we can do about it, and you know, this is just how the world's going to be, and sort of like, well, no, we can actually do something about it, and it is, you know, it is an awful problem, but there are ways that we can sort of solve it and help around it.
What do you guys think are the biggest threats caused by plastic pollution? Would you say as a community we could improve, or would you blame the government?
Yeah, I think for me, like, the biggest problem with it is people misunderstanding the issue, and I definitely do think that there is you know, a level of government and stakeholder responsibility to that. And you know, I think like with the plastic straws issue, for example, you know, sort of especially in like recent years, there's been this massive drive and push to sort of like reduce, you know, plastic straws, and that's all you ever hear about when you hear about plastic pollution, but that actually just makes up a tiny like fraction of the problem as a whole. But because like all these big companies have sort of like steered opinion towards that and like had that as the focus point, sort of, I feel like there's been a real like knee-jerk reaction to be like, right, everyone needs to get rid of their straws, and that's it, we've done it, right guys, like it's all good, when, you know, the reality is that the majority of sort of sea plastic pollution comes from like fishing gear and fishing boats, and you know, and like going back to that Seaspiracy documentary, I think they did a really good job of highlighting how that is, you know, the main issue with plastic pollution is that, you know, it comes from all these like fishing vessels and unregulated fishing industries, but there is never really a focus on that because it's always sort of towards the fault is always blamed on the consumer. And I definitely think that there needs to be more like sort of governmental and sort of like large business accountability for, you know, their impacts and their sort of part in that. So
I think, you know, I definitely agree with the fact with the blame being shifted and how it has been shifted. I think a very sort of one of the major threats I think that comes out of plastic pollution is the sheer amount of it that is in the ocean. You know, there is so much plastic in the ocean, and the fact that, you know, it's not a durable you know, product. It doesn't rot away or anything. It stays there. I think there was something that the United Nations Environmental Agency said a while ago, that every bit of plastic in the ocean is, you know, still there from when it was first put in the ocean. Now that might be an exaggeration, but there is so much plastic still in the ocean. And, you know, there's problems with leaching, which is when obviously the, you know, the coating of the plastic or the paint on the plastic breaks down as opposed to the plastic itself, and then chemicals go into the ocean and they get into the food chain. You know, and then we eat them, so it causes us as much harm as it does to the rest of the environment. You know, and it is, like Eloise said, it is a big problem with misunderstanding and shifting the blame. What governments and corporations do oftentimes is they talk to us about how the individual needs to conserve and how the individual needs to buy more sustainably, and whilst that is very much the case, you know, and I think that whilst corporations do need to be blamed because it does a lot of damage to just blame the individual and just to blame the consumer, you know, it is kind of on both of us, but it is more on the corporations who pump tons and tons of plastic into our oceans, and the governments who have policies that allow this to happen just for monetary gain. In this case, the blame needs to be shifted onto governments, because they need to be told that you aren't doing enough, and the corporations that are funding all of this, stop telling people as much as you do to buy more sustainable things, and actually address your own policies and address what you're doing. I think as consumers, we also need to take appropriate action, because I do think that we sort of drive the process in a way. What we buy, what we consume is what drives markets, and in the end, markets will drive economy, and economy drives policy. So in the end, it is on both of us almost to do something about it. But at the moment, the blame has been shifted too much to the individual, and it needs to be shifted more to governments and corporations, saying in terms of microplastics and leaching. These things need to be talked about more, rather than the very famous plastic problems that are told about in the media.
Yeah, and I think sort of like going off of that as well, like there was a paper that was like published quite recently where they like sort of going back to the sheer amount of volume of plastic in the ocean. They went to a fish market in China, and every single bit of fish, so like lobsters, shellfish, so like crabs, mussels, any crab sort of thing, they found that like in every single case there was like microplastics found within the system, and in some cases it was like almost like half a gram of plastic, where you think, oh, that's not really that much sort of thing. But like, when you go to a restaurant, are you likely to eat just like one mussel on its own? No, you have like quite a few. So, you can sort of see how quickly it sort of like builds up in your systems, and, and how that already is in our food chain. And yet people just aren't aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's really, really interesting that you both have said is this shift on consumer blame, the shift on the individual. What ideas do you guys have that you could put forward that you'd like to see improve this issue?
I think there needs to, I think it does have to be higher education within the public about, seeing what these issues will actually mean for us, because we still don't really know what the, how it's going to affect us in, say, like 120 years, or like future generations, how plastic's going to affect their lives. But we have a good idea of it.
Yeah.
But it's, and that's people who study it and, look into it, and, they don't really have a good idea. So the public, they do need to sort of learn and sort of hold the governments to account, sort of thing,
Yeah, because there's this concept called greenwashing, which is, a concept where you basically, what the company is doing is they're saying they're doing all of these great things for the environment, and when in fact these things might not actually be helping the environment at all, but they seem like they are to the public, and then the public will go to these companies and these shops because they'll believe that they're doing something for the environment, and two, they actually harm the environment a lot of the time. But what the companies are doing is they're taking a small bit of research and they're using it to prop up their argument. And this kind of stems from another problem, which is kind of the accessibility of science in general. So what scientists do a lot of the time is they'll hold back a lot of information until they have the full thing, which is good, because obviously then you don't get like things like fake news, and you don't get things that don't actually make any sense. But it also has the problem of the public not knowing anything really about the problem until it gets to a point where it is actually so bad that you can't really do anything about it, and also in terms of the fact that a lot of the public don't know how to access this information. The scientific papers are written in almost other languages. People go online and they read them, they don't really understand what they're talking about, or there'll be policies which are miles and miles of pages long, no one will ever read them. You're then relying on a scientist to interpret it for you and to tell you, or a company to hire a scientist to tell them, and so then they can tell you, and you look to the companies and you think, oh, they're telling me all the information, so I don't have to read it. It's a problem with accessibility at the end of the day. Science has become so inaccessible and become such a different area from the public that we now have to rely on other people to interpret it for us. And that can be a problem when those people have agendas and they have biases, and whoever pays them has an agenda. And so then we might get the wrong information. So I think, like Eloise said, education is a massive, massive thing, and needs to be, science needs to become more accessible. Things need to be taught in a way where everyone can understand, not just people who have a quote unquote science degree, you know, I think education around things which haven't yet come into effect needs to be a thing. You know, it needs to be taught in a way that people know that this is still something being researched and we don't know a lot about it, but it is still something you need to keep in mind for the future. And it is still something you might have to worry about. You know, this openness in communication and this openness in terms of education is a key thing in saving the environment, because, you know, it's kind of linking back to the first question about why I'm passionate about saving it at all. You know, passionate about saving the environment, yes, but also passionate about saving humans and human lives. And this affects humans everywhere. And we have the privilege of choosing whether or not we're interested in this subject, or choosing whether or not we can actually learn about this subject and teach about it. And so I think we kind of have a duty to those people who don't have a privilege to then tell them about it, to then study it, to then understand it more, and to spread that information. Because if we don't, that's, you know, that's neglecting our privilege, and also accepting the fact that these people are going to die and we don't care.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's that openness of communication, it's that more education on subjects, and it is that understanding the privilege.
Yeah. And I think what's really important for our listeners to hear is any experiences you guys have had in your journey. What have you seen? What has it been like? How has it affected you?
Doing this degree and understanding the, you know, seeing rubbish on the shores, and seeing, as part of my degree, pictures and photographs of rubbish in the ocean, and seeing effects on other countries, you then begin to understand it a lot more, I think. So it is a mixture of that. And then obviously I write articles on various subjects to do with climate change and plastic pollution. And so interviewing people from other countries and interviewing experts from other areas on their experiences, because they've gone out into these other countries and they've seen that there are mountains of plastic waste piling up. And half of that, it doesn't even belong to those countries. It belongs to us. But what's happened is we've dumped it in, it's gone all the way there on the ocean, and it's ended up on their shores, and they're the ones paying for it. So once you do really talk to these people and you really understand what they've been going through, and even on this degree, when you see what's happening on our shores, then you do tend to get quite scared. You know, you tend to get quite worried that this isn't something that's going to go away too soon. You can't lose that hope, I think, because if you do lose that hope, again, you're not understanding that you have the privilege to forget about it, to turn a blind eye, which I just don't think we are allowed to do.
Yeah, and I think for me, so I've been so for my dissertation, I've been looking into I've been lucky to work with some locals in Fiji. They live in like a fishing community in a village in sort of the Northern Territory, sort of like the northern half of it. And they were sort of saying about how, because I was asked them about how they have, what changes they've seen into their environment, and every single person that was asked has said, you know, there's been it's like a real scary amount of change that's happened, because they rely on like coral reefs as their main sort of fishing to sort of like make money and sort of, you know, sustain their environment and stuff like that. And they've were saying that, you know, the coral is like massively reduced, they barely get any fish now, sort of thing. And, you know, a lot of the fishermen are out for ridiculously long hours of the day, and they just never come back with enough catch to sort of sustain themselves. And, you know, that's a change that they've only really seen sort of in the last 20-30 years, so we're sort of in most of their sort of lifetimes. Yeah. And, you know, that people are scared about it because, you know, they don't understand the change. And especially with this like community I've been working in, they feel, especially from like their feelings towards the government, have definitely been that, you know, they feel completely neglected, you know, that there's not been any support from them, and, you know, they feel like they've just left to sort of almost sort of inhabit this land that isn't gonna, you know, survive for much longer because of like the sheer amount of pollution and sort of reduction that they've sort of seen in the environment around them. So yeah, it is.
You feel a loss of control, I think, if you're in those environments, because this is your land, you know, this is your country, and there are effects that are destroying it that don't even come from within your own country. They're coming from other places and other areas of the world that you've never been to. You know, you've never even seen these people, you've never met these people, and yet the things that they're doing are affecting your lives and affecting your future. And you can think that, you know, you can just sort of feel them feeling that they've lost control. You know, they've lost control over their own lives. And that is a really horrible place to be in, you know. And a lot of people on a lesser scale you think about people in this country who have lost control over, where they're allowed to live, in terms of financial stability, in terms of where, they go to school and that sort of thing. It's that, but on a massive scale, because this is affecting these people's futures. And so I think it is important that if you are thinking about plastic, you are thinking about what you're going to buy and that sort of thing, then you have to sort of think it's affecting someone else, in a far greater way than it will ever affect me.
Yeah. What advice would you give to students who want to start making a change and who are constantly buying these things without even being aware that they're plastic or what's going to happen after it? What advice would you give to student unions and universities to help solve this problem?
Even just sort of reading books or articles about it, or sort of, just seeing what's out there, what you can sort of find yourself. Is that, just questioning about when you're in supermarkets and things like that, and like buying just sort of, everyday like items, you think, why has it got this much plastic on it? Do I actually need this item because it's, from the packaging that it has? And I do understand that it's not a easy thing, because obviously, especially being students and everything like that, like, a lot of people struggle with money, and so it's not always the best choice. But then you can do things sort of to help that, like for example EcoBricks and ecobricks.org. They're a really good website and organization that they sort of show you how to make your own ecobricks, so you can save the packaging that you sort of can't avoid and that will end up in landfill. And they can use that to sort of help sort of projects all around the world sort of thing to reuse this plastic and sort of conserve it, rather than sort of ending up in the middle of nowhere, going back into the ocean eventually.
I think that, really important to research, because we're in a sort of era where Google is just there, the websites are just there, and obviously you have to look at like citations and things, and you have to check if information is correct. What if some of your products have microplastics in them? There's a really good website called Beat the Microbead, which is a website that tells you different tiers of importance in terms of products that have microplastics in them. So they'll tell you in red, these products definitely have microplastics in them. For example, things like butylene or Carboma, or these kind of things. These are on the back of like shampoos and toothpastes and things. They tell you what's in them, but they obviously expect you not to know what they are. So you read it and you don't really understand what they are. But if you read, these websites, and if you look at the resources on these websites, you can check if there are microplastics in certain things. And like Eloise is saying, when you're going to the supermarket, check for what you need in reality, and what you need that has plastic packaging as opposed to stuff that isn't plastically packaged. I think that's important to look at different resources, read online, and just sort of think to yourself, what would I need in this circumstance? Looking at different supermarkets that do very sustainable packaging and sustainable buying. So for example, Iceland, they're extremely good. They don't use palm oil. They have a lot of products that are very sustainable to buy, and Lidl and those sort of things. So yeah, just research, I think, and education around it is the most important thing. And like I said before, reflecting on the privilege that we've got to be able to choose products that harm the environment, as opposed to someone who might not ever have that option.
Now, that was Dawood and Eloise on a fantastic insight on how to tackle plastic waste. I guess what we can get from this discussion is that we may have a great challenge ahead of us, but it's time to strike while the iron is hot and to create the sustainable future that we so desperately want to see, a zero plastic future. Back to you, Saffron.
Thank you, Denny. Now, on a bit of a lighter note, we've held on to some of our yearly traditions, even during this pandemic, with the Academy Awards, the Oscars, a chance for us to appreciate our very greatest stars. Fuad will tell us more.
Yes, so yes, the 93rd Academy Awards took place last Sunday, and the ceremony was actually in person, unlike most of the award ceremony we've seen over the past year. The ceremony had been delayed for 2 months and broadcast this year without a host. Instead of opting for acceptance speeches via Zoom, the Oscars had 2 in-person locations, the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood and Union Station in downtown Los Angeles. And some overseas nominees participated from London and Paris. Now, the awards took place days after Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted for killing George Floyd. Actor-director Regina King acknowledged the battle for social justice in her opening remarks.
It has been quite a year. and we are still smack dab in the middle of it. We are mourning the loss of so many, and I have to be honest, if things had gone differently this past week in Minneapolis, I might have traded in my heels for marching boots. Now, I know that a lot of you people at home want to reach for your remote when you feel like Hollywood is preaching to you. But as a mother of a Black son, I know the fear that so many live with, and no amount of fame or fortune changes that. Okay?
So, what were some of the big moments in these Oscars?
So, I mean, the awards did offer a few very historic moments as Chloe Zhao became the first Chinese woman and the first woman of color to be awarded Best Director for her work on Nomadland, which also took Best Picture and swooped many Oscars. Zhao beat out Emerald Fennell, who was nominated for Promising Young Woman, marking the first time two women were nominated in the directing category. Nomadland was only the second film directed by a woman to be named Best Picture. Here's Chloe Zhao accepting her award.
This is for anyone who has the faith and the courage to hold on to the goodness in themselves and to hold on to the goodness in each other, no matter how difficult it is to do that. And this is for you. You inspire me to keep going. Thank you.
Yes, and also we saw the film Minari's Yoon Ho-jung won Best Supporting Actress, the first Korean acting win in the show's 93-year history. We also saw Steven Yeun of Minari, who was the first Asian American, and Riz Ahmed of Sound of Metal, the first Muslim to be nominated for Best Actor. Though both lost to Anthony Hopkins, whose surprise win came for his work in The Father. Hopkins was not present to accept the award, which the late, great Chadwick Boseman was tipped to win for his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Instead, a surprise Watkins released a tribute video to Chadwick Boseman from his home in Wales the following day.
The Academy actually did receive some backlash on the back of a Chadwick Boseman NFT that were auctioned at the event. While some of the proceeds were going to colon cancer research, they were still pretty poorly received, rather. I don't know if anyone else has seen them, but they looked a little bit bobblehead-esque, and it just seemed to be in pretty poor taste. One Twitter user said, "I don't know what's worse, the fact that it's an NFT, the fact that Chadwick Boseman's death is being commodified, or the fact that it was in every Oscar nominee's gift bag." So it's safe to say that they kind of missed the mark on this one.
Yes, and just on top of that, Daniel Kaluuya picked up the award for Best Supporting Actor for a performance in Judas and the Black Messiah. It's fair to say his heartwarming and inspiring acceptance speech took an unexpected turn, leaving his mother, who was attending the awards, pretty red-faced.
And I'm going to get back to work Tuesday morning, because tonight I'm going up. We're going up, you know what I mean? We're enjoying ourselves tonight because we've got to celebrate. We've got to celebrate life, man. We're breathing, we're walking. It's incredible. It's incredible. Like, it's incredible. My mum met my dad. They had sex. It's amazing. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I'm here. You know what I mean? So I'm so happy to be alive.
Yeah, so a pretty wild ending to his speech. And if you do get a chance to see the video of Kaluuya's mother and her reaction, it is pretty brilliant.
Yeah. So overall, how was the ceremony received this year, do you think?
Well, of course, this last year has been very difficult for cinema and cinema goers, and we've seen a number of big releases being pushed back multiple times, like the new James Bond film, which was supposed to be in cinemas in the summer of 2020. The fact that Oscar viewership was down 58% compared to the last year makes sense, since there has been this major disruption in the film industry, and the results, naturally people's interests have dropped from the glitz and glamour of the Oscars. While accepting the Best Picture award for Frances McDormand, star of Nomadland, encourage movie lovers to keep cinema alive.
Please watch our movie on the largest screen possible, and one day, very, very soon, take everyone you know into a theater, shoulder to shoulder, in that dark space, and watch every film that's represented here tonight.
Yes, here's hoping that we can return to cinema soon and enjoy some of these brilliant films on the big screen. It was great to see the talent of Riz Ahmed, Daniel Kaluuya, and Chloe Zhao get recognized on the biggest stage in film. Hopefully, this is a sign of progression at the top of the film industry and can inspire talent from all corners of the globe and all walks of life to pursue their craft in what has historically been a pretty inaccessible industry. Back to you, Saffron.
Thanks, Fouad. And that concludes the final episode of Politics Hour International. Thank you so much for everyone who has stayed with us throughout this year. I've been your host, Saffron, joined with Duni and Fouad. Thanks and goodbye.